Hi, this is Pamela Wirth from the Encouraging Wellness podcast, and today I have Dr. Gregory Kelly. Um, Dr. Kelly is a director of product development at Neurohacker Collective, naturopathic physician, and author of the book Shapeshift. He was the editor of the journal Alternative Medicine Review and has been an instructor at the University of Bridgeport in the College of Naturopathic Medicine, where he taught classes in advanced clinical nutrition, counseling skills, and doctor patient relationships. Dr. Kelly has published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition, contributed 3 chapters to the textbook of natural medicine, and has more than 30 journal articles indexed in PubMed, which is really impressive. His areas of expertise include nootropics, anti aging, regenerative medicine, weight management, sleep, and the chronobiology of performance and health. Thank you, Doctor, for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure to be here today.
So, obviously, you've got a lot of areas. I think a lot of health and wellness comes down to some pretty basic areas, but with love, um, your perspective and thoughts into how you got into this journey and some of the ways that you really help people in terms of anti-aging, regenerative medicine. In my experience, for instance, just because you have a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that it's a forever diagnosis or a forever thing. And so I think, you know, working with doctors like yourself is really powerful and important. So please.
Yeah, I think, that's the difference between managing a problem and curing a problem, right? So the goal is always to resolve something whenever that's possible. And I know one of my biases anyways is to always argue for that possibility. But anyways, in terms of my journey, I studied engineering as an undergrad. The Navy in the US paid for my scholarship. And so at the time, this was 84, when I graduated, I owed them 6 years between active duty and reserves. And I was one of the weird officers that kind of came in from the beginning and realized, geez, I don't know anything about food and eating. Someone just always put things in front of me and I've eaten them. Maybe I should up my game a little bit in this area. So I found people that seemed to know a lot more about it than me, that worked out at the gym and were in good shape. And so my interest really in what eventually led me to naturopathic medicine just started out with that idea. Like, so many of the officers I'm seeing that have been in the Navy for a while are, overweight, out of shape, not particularly fit. What do I do to prevent that in an environment that's not necessarily the healthiest, or it wasn't at that point in time? And when I got out of the Navy, I just continued to build more interest in things that eventually all were encompassed within naturopathic medicine, things like herbs and acupuncture and the importance of nature and all kinds of things like that. So pretty shortly after my career in the Navy ended, I heard there was a new naturopathic school opening up in the desert. And at the time it was Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm like, all right, I'm there. And so I was a member of that first class and was really fortunate. We had some great teachers and experiences as part of, I think, the birthing of that new naturopathic college. And graduated in 96, and I've just been doing things related to naturopathic medicine and health ever since.
No, that's incredible. So, in terms of a lot of the patients that you see, what are some of the overall um, larger themes of people that you're seeing now?
Well, I don't work directly with patients anymore. My current role, I work much more in, I guess you'd say, education. So, writing blog content, creating dietary supplements, educating people. So, but I would say, like going back in time, I think there's almost like buckets you can put people in, but many of the buckets share the same common contributors, right? So the analogy I would typically use goes back to a game that my brothers and sisters and I had as children. It was called The Last Straw, but if you Google the camel game or Last Straw, you'd find it. So this goes back to the late 60s, so I'm dating myself. But the gist of the game was there was this plastic camel. Each team competed adding straws to the bucket on their side. And at some point, one of the teams would put the last straw in, and literally the camel's back would collapse. And so I tend to think of that analogy as a really useful one, anything related to health, because what happens when someone shows up and gets their diagnosis, something happened to cause the bucket to weigh more than our back can support, right? The health buckets, so to speak, or that health back has collapsed. And the way I would typically describe that as more like in a stress paradigm. So the straws in this case, think of as all the many different potential stressors in our world and someone's life, right? There's ones we all share that there's not much we can do about. There's other ones that, depending on what we do or don't do, will either carry that straw or that bucket will be less, right? It will weigh less. And so I guess my experience is that most of us are carrying lots of straws all the time. And that because of that, a variety of things end up getting us to that last straw and our tipping point. But the biggest and heaviest straw for most of us is going to be mental and emotional, something that we're thinking about all the time, something that we're ruminating about, something that maybe we're doing that's against one of our core values. So those straws tend to be ones that if you let them hang around in the basket too long, they just weigh it down a lot. And because of that, we just end up being really close to something else, if not that direct straw, tipping us over the brink. So fundamentally, my approach would be, let's figure out for you, Pamela, or whoever we're working with, what straws are in your basket, which ones are removable, which ones are likely to be the heaviest, because those are the ones we want to get out the first. And then is there, in the meantime, something we can be doing to build resilience, to make you able to carry a bigger burden of straws? And it's kind of a simple story, but that approach to health and invariably make sure that you're covering all the basics, that the foundational stuff is being emphasized. And you don't have the foundations chasing, the fringe things isn't nearly as good to get your journey all the way back to health. It's much more suited to managing. So a lot to distill there, but that would be it in a simple story.
So when someone has something chronic going on, where do you like to start?
So like what I would do typically is I'm very mind body biased. So I would typically listen to the stories they're telling, like what meaning is their illness, right? Like how are they interpreting it? And if nothing else, a lot of suffering is our story. There's the thing we have, right, which is going to be whatever it is. But then our story about it often will amplify the degree of suffering, right? So I think a big part of what I tried to teach naturopathic students when I was a professor or visiting professor at the University of Bridgeport was, imagine your patients are coming in, they're saying, doctor, this is going on in my body. I don't really understand it, and I'm frightened. If you do nothing else, get them to tell a better story around it, and that will alleviate a lot of the suffering. And I think our stories about things end up being a straw in and of themselves. So I think, one of my goals when I was in practice was always to help people become better storytellers.
And then what sort of tests or data do you like to gather? What sort of herbs and plants and treatments and things do you like to, think about?
Sure. So I think I've never been like a crazy, like, let's test everything person. I think it's much better, to be nuanced, right? So depending on what the context of this person's presenting with. And often, so one of the things I found, and there's a great study, there was something called Biosphere 2 that was out in the desert in Tucson in the early 90s. And this group of scientists went in and lived there for, I think it was a full year. But they measured all kinds of, like what we would think of as biomarkers, really cool things, hormones like, stress hormones and thyroid hormones, and you name it, at the beginning. And then they measured them periodically through, they measured them immediately after, and then they measured them, like 6 months follow-up. And because of nuances with Biosphere 2, they underestimated how many calories they could grow as food. So they chronically were slightly hungry through the whole thing. So I think the estimates were they had about 1,800 calories a day. So not crazy like diet imposed by the circumstances, but not nothing, right? So long story short is all these things we would normally look at, blood sugar and thyroid and cortisol, all those changed dramatically with just this little calorie deficit. And a lot of them looked like they were getting better, despite these people being, hungry and lethargic a bit. And then all of them returned to normal when they left and could eat enough food again. So what I'm always concerned about is treating numbers without context. the goal is always, let's get you to do the foundational things for a while, and then we'll see what numbers are still out of normal. Because, someone that's just been dieting to try to lose weight is going to have a bunch of things that look a little bit as if they're treatable, like low thyroid, that will normalize often if they ate more food, which they may not be willing to do, but their appetite might be driving them to do that. So I just personally, probably actually under test compared to most naturopathic doctors. And the things I cared the most about were, body composition, heart rate variability, and then trying to ask questions that would give me insights into what that number meant. Because if someone, like, as an example, a belief of mine is there's the thing and there's our relationship to the thing. So, like, as an example, someone might look super healthy, right? They're eating super well, they're exercising a lot, and they're super neurotic about it. They're, controlling everything they eat, they're hungry all the time, they're craving X, Y, and Z, but they're not allowing themselves to eat it. So they're putting a lot of willpower into it. Another person may look equally as healthy, great body shape, and have like on autopilot. They're eating whatever their appetite dictates. So those two things, the thing is similar, but their relationship is so different. And ultimately, I care much more about someone's relationship with something, because that first person, their relationship is probably not sustainable and likely to be contributing to, like, as a straw fundamentally. Where the second person, their relationship would be wholesome. It's probably sustainable. It's not adding any weight. So I'm always trying to get out, what's the brain piece? Are you ruminating about something? Or, are you having to exert a lot of willpower for something that theoretically someone else is doing on autopilot? And if that's the case, then that thing that looks healthy may actually be not healthy at the moment. So, so those things to me have always just been much more interesting and important than doing a bunch of lab tests.
Yeah. So, you touch on nutrition. Do you have a preference when it comes to nutrition and optimizing someone's health?
So I do, but I also am a firm believer that there's different strokes for different folks. So, like, I guess two principles that I keep in mind all the time. And one was one of my, what I thought of as wisest nutrition teachers when I was a student, said something to the effect of, there can be a big difference between a diet that takes someone that's not healthy and moves them to healthy, and a diet that keeps them healthy. So I always try to keep that in mind, right? No matter where we start, the goal is to get to healthy and stay healthy. And quite often what happens, people will start something. And the truth is, if you've been eating a poor diet, almost any different diet is going to move you towards healthy for a while. But if you're not careful, that same diet might cruise you right through that to some new area of relative inadequacy. So I try to keep that in mind. And then the other thing would be that, some people do great on keto, other people not so much. Some people do great on a more vegan, vegetarian diet. Other people, I've just seen that diet over time not work for. So I think it's really important not to buy into the idea that this thing works for everyone, right? It's always going to be somewhat individualized. And personally, I try to eat more seasonally, so eat things that are available in your local farmer's market. I think it always serves most of us if we can eat more whole food, less processed. So I think more than anything, it's coming up with a few different heuristics or simple algorithms. And my original one, when I was an officer in the Navy and read my first diet book, was a pretty simple one and not really great, but it was something to the effect of, look on the label, choose whatever thing has less fat. And I think most of us don't have super complicated algorithms when it comes to choosing food, right? When it's like, oh, this one has sugar, so it's a no. This one has stevia, and that's fine, so I'll have that. Or this one's, keto friendly. And my algorithm is much more about, what can we do to make sure what we're eating is the best quality within the confines of whatever that is? Because even with any of these, different diets, there's things that might be approved in it that are less healthy versions, and others that are much healthier, right? So, like, simple thing, I'd much rather have an almond than almond butter, and I'd much rather have almond butter than almond oil, and I'd much rather have almond oil than something made to taste like an almond.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Sugar is interesting. And from all the data that we can get our hands around, it causes a fair amount of inflammation. What are your thoughts around some of the substitute sugars out there? Is there anything that, is frankly okay to eat that sweetens things, or is it if it's sweet, don't eat?
So I'm very much a dose makes the poison person in most things. So that would be the same with sugar. So there's relatively few things that to me are like black and white, like absolutely no under all circumstances. And the sweet taste, there's only a couple of tastes that we have, right? We can taste, bitter, sour, sweet, salt. And the reason is those are evolutionarily important tastes. So there's a book, Burn, by a researcher, came out a couple of years ago, but he did a lot of work with a hunter-gatherer tribe in Africa called the Hansa. And one of the things in his book is they'll put a lot of time and effort into finding honey. And when they find it, they'll consume a lot of honey. And, this tribe stays thin, healthy. They're, don't have what we think of as the diseases of Western civilization and diet. And you'd find that for honey in any of the still hunter-gatherer-like tribes will highly value honey and put a lot of their resources into acquiring it and eating it. So honey, to me, that would be, that's the main sweetener I use. And then other things that would be similar, that are honey, almost all parts of the world had, but, maple syrup, in Canada, and I grew up in New England, right? So, I'll have maple syrup once in a while. And the truth is, I will almost never eat any sweetener that doesn't have some calories. So I'm not a big fan of the stevias. And I think monk fruit would be the best of those. And then I think the artificial ones all have, some things that end up being concerns for me. But I think, remember I said the brain is super important to me. So so you see sucralose is used in a lot of the energy drinks as an example. And so this studied an energy drink, the version with sugar, the version without sugar, and compared that basically to water, like a beverage without energy drink things. And the truth was that the energy drink with the sugar way outperformed the one without it. The one without it, actually, you could make an argument in some things it was worse than the placebo drink. So I just think, again, that idea of context, that things aren't necessarily on their own good or bad. If you're going to have an energy drink, you're probably better served having the one with some sugar than the one that's got sucralose in it. But that would just be my bias based on the research. So I guess, long story short, it's like, what are you trying to achieve? And then most things have, follow a Goldilocks principle type of rule. Too little is a problem, too much is a problem, and there's going to be some just right amount. And with sugar, I think for many people, there's a just right amount, probably lower than the average American is eating by quite a bit. We evolved to be able to, especially to deal well with these natural sugars like honey.
Yeah, yeah. No, I tend to follow if it comes naturally, it's in moderation, it's probably okay. But you know, there's obviously other circumstances, like if you're drinking a sports drink and you're doing some really large strenuous activity, then you're probably burning all those sugars, and that's your body needs to replenish anyway. Um, when people are thinking about what it means for regenerative health, anti-aging, what does that really mean to you, and what should people be looking for, asking about, thinking about?
Well, I think in the anti-aging community, there's two really big camps. So one is an idea that something called programmed aging, but the short of it is that the same genes that do great things to get us when we're young to be able to have babies and procreate and have kids, were selected for that. And so some of those same genes as we get older actually can contribute to harm, right? So that's programmed aging. And there's not much with currently that can be done about programmed aging. The other camp has to do with aging's more about slow, gradual accumulation of damage. And to deal in that camp, it's about repairing damage and getting rid of damage. And that's just much more actionable with what's available today. So I think that would be the focus. So that would be my focus. And then things that can be done that help would be your things like, I don't know if you're aware or have ever encountered Walter Longo's fasting mimicking diet as an example, or like these short periodic fasts where you'll go a couple days without eating. And what that does is it promotes things like autophagy, and autophagy would be a cellular repair process. So another thing would be taking senolytic compounds. So these are things like quercetin or quercetin or piperlongum extracts that help our body get cells that are kind of stuck in a semi-damaged space and get rid of them. So get rid of something called senescent cells. So those, to me, are, I think the most exciting areas currently, things that are in that, let's amplify the innate things in our cells like autophagy and apoptosis that our body would normally use to get rid of damaged things. And let's support processes like, DNA repair through, I think those are your NAD boosters, like your nicotinamide riboside and things like that.
Good. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on? Anything else that we're missing? Weight loss, first place to start. I mean, a lot of people like to go on fad diets, but there's probably a way to, again, be thinking about what's real food and, what's.
Yeah, so I think, so again, this would be my bias. A non-insignificant amount of people aren't getting as much good quality sleep as they need. And quite a bit of us have, like, go back to my time in the Navy, I was sleep deprived the better part of that 5.5 years because of circumstances on a ship. And what's pretty clear now is when people are sleep deprived, they eat more food, and they also are gravitate towards less healthy versions of food, right? So they're going to want the starch. They're going to want the donut instead of the salad, fundamentally, right? So for me, it would be much more important to work on the low-hanging fruit before you get to like, oh, I'm going to reduce calories or put all this willpower into something. Where my belief is that a part of our brain keeps track of how much sleep debt we're in. So basically, you haven't got enough sleep for a couple of years. That part of our brain is like, all right, at some point you're gonna do something and pay back a whole bunch of that. And doing something would be hibernation, right? Getting a lot more sleep than normal. So I would tend to think for most people, it's much more important to focus on one, starting now, getting enough sleep. But then if you've had periods where you've gone with insufficient sleep, then schedule more sleep than you need, like sleep more. And fundamentally, if you can sleep, you need sleep. So if sleep can't really run in the black, so to speak, only sleep that can only run in the red. So I would always start with that. The next thing would be body clock. Our body clock has a profound effect on metabolic health. So things like, getting light exposure first thing in the morning, getting out towards the end of the day, maybe wearing blue blockers at night. So if you start to put those things in place, like I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes if you get the foundational things in place, a lot of other things just become easier. So, and then, if we're sleep deprived and our rhythms are a mess, our body clock's disrupted, the same diet that might actually be really great for us will be harder for us to stick to, maybe. So anyway, that would be my preference. Those two first, then work on stress. And in the interim, try to get people to learn more about what food quality is, but let them eat as much as they want. Hope that helps.
I think so. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. It's been great having you today. We'll be sure to put all in the show notes where people can find you. If you want to go ahead and add here where people can find you as well.
Yeah, so I'm at neurohacker.com. Like you mentioned at the beginning, I'm the director of product development. I write any blogs there, and then you can follow Neurohacker on Instagram. We do a lot there to engage our community and provide information.
Super. Well, thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you.